Hello and welcome. Recently I've been reading a book on the tabernacle, written by a gentleman by the name of Brad Scott. And in this book, he talks about the wings of the cherubim referring to trust. So where does he get this from? Well, there's several verses that he mentions, but here's one of them. In Psalms chapter 36, verse 7, it says, "How precious is your loving kindness, O God! Therefore the children of men put their trust under the shadow of your wings." When I was reading this chapter and these verses, there's something else that came to mind. If we go over to Exodus chapter 19, verse 4, it says, "You have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings, and brought you to myself." So God told the Israelites, after he had taken them out of Egypt and taken them to Mount Sinai, he says, "I bore you on eagle's wings." Well, what does the word wings there have to do with trust? Well, they put a trust on something that God had told them earlier. We go over to Exodus chapter 3, verse 14 through 17. It says, "And God said to Moses, Go and gather the elders of Israel together and say to them, I will bring you up out of the affliction of Egypt to a land flowing with milk and honey." So God had told them ahead of time through Moses that he was going to take them out of Egypt and that he was going to take them to the promised land. But they had to trust what he said. Now, I may think, well, how much trust did they need? They had just seen the 10 plagues, some pretty awesome stuff. It doesn't take a whole lot of trust. But as they were leaving Egypt, what if it looked something more like this? A desert, a wilderness. Well, I don't know about you, that doesn't look very promising to me. So even though the Israelites knew that the promised land was ahead, they couldn't see it, and they had to trust what the Lord had said. Later on, while they're in Mount Sinai, God goes on and says this. In Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4 through 8, he says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. And these words which I command you today shall be in your heart. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand." So why is God being so adamant about the words that they hear? He says, bind them on your hand. Because within those verses, he also says, teach them thoroughly to your children. Speak of them while you sit in your home, while you walk on the way, when you retire and when you arise. Bind them as a sign on your hand, and let them be frontals between your eyes. Write them on the doorposts of your house and upon your gates. So he's saying, make them a part of everything, a part of all your entire life. So why is he being so adamant though? Well, because at that point in time, the Israelites don't know what they're going to see in the promised land, but God does. And he's saying, hold on to my words, hold on to my promise. Don't let them go. Don't let my words go. Don't let my promises go. Well, what happens? Do they trust? Do they hold on to the promises of the Lord? Well, when they get to the promised land, 12 of them go to check out the land, to see what the enemy looks like. And 10 of them come back and they say, we can't do it. We're like grasshoppers. We're not going to make it. And the people become discouraged and they become afraid and they don't go in. They lose trust in what the Lord had told them that he would do and that they would be able to do as well. So what does Jesus have to say about all this? Well, if you go over to Mark chapter 12, verse 28 through 29, it says, "Then one of the scribes came, asked him, 'Which is the first commandment of all?' Jesus answered him, 'The first of all the commandments is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. This is the first commandment. And the second, like it, is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these." So Jesus himself reiterated what God had told the Israelites way back when. And he says, you need to hear, you need to listen to what God has said and follow his instruction. That means to love, to follow and to obey the instructions that the Lord has given us. So what does that have to do with the wings in the tabernacle? Well, where were the instructions of the Lord placed? Instructions or the commandments of the Lord were placed in the Ark of the Testimony, or the Ark of the Covenant, and above it were the wings of the cherubim. So the Ark of the Testimony, or the Ark of the Covenant, is like a picture to us. It shows us that if we grab on, if we bind those instructions, if we bind them to our heart, if we grab onto them, then we will be found under the shelter of His wings. And if there's giants that come into our lives, well, if we're following what He's called us to do, and we're following His instruction, there's nothing for us to be afraid. And He promises that He will always be with us. And that's why it says in Psalms chapter 61 verse 4, it says, I will abide in your tabernacle forever. I will trust in the shelter of your wings. Those are great promises from the Lord. And if we trust in Him, He will always be with us, because we will be found under His wings. Well, I hope this was an encouragement to you. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you soon.